Welcome to Defenders of Craft, a Craft Pride podcast, bringing you the heart and soul of beer culture in Austin and around Texas.
All right, everybody, welcome to Defenders of Craft. We're doing a live panel. Today I have with me Jeff Stuffings and Jeff Young, the proprietors of two of my favorite sour breweries here in town. How you guys doing today?
Doing great. Good. Glad to be here for another Texas Craft Brewers Fest.
Yeah, it's always my favorite party of the year. We have a lot of fun out here. Craft Pride is a big sponsor of this festival, and we really wanted to do something special this time. So we wanted to have you guys out to come talk about, a couple things that you guys have plenty to say. Also here with me is Nick De La Rosa, my co-host for the day.
Hello, y'all.
And then we have Josh Stewart down here.
Howdy.
And Catherine Contreras.
Hello.
Yeah, we got some podcast love in the house tonight. The folks from Liquid Lunch,
Giving
She's
it.
Crafty Podcast, and Interbrews.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you guys for coming out. I really enjoyed coming on y'all's show in Houston a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
I wasn't quite as ready as I should have been to be talking about what I was doing, but we're getting there, and here we are today. Thank you guys for making the trip from your respective cities.
So is this your first? Are these your first moments right now?
This is my first live panel. We recorded our first episode last week.
Okay.
It drops Friday.
Oh.
So we're pretty excited about it. I got to get a
Watch
couple
out.
under before we can start getting on Google Play and
Yeah.
iTunes and all that.
Did you have any regrets afterwards? Because the first one you're always like, oh.
No, it actually went swimmingly. I was surprised
Did it?
like
Oh.
how
That's a
well
little-
it went.
That's
Yeah,
a
it was
little
good.
arrogant.
Well, then we'll get all the
see.
regrets
We'll
out of the
see
way
when
on
we
this
hear it. We'll see. We'll see what happens.
I guess let's just jump right into it. One of the questions that I wanted to talk to you guys, and also we are live on the Facebook Live right now.
Sweet.
On Craft Pride's Facebook. Anybody who's here at the festival, please, if you want to hear what we're saying, follow our live stream at Craft Pride on Facebook. One of the things that I wanted to clear up for folks who may have not sure what sour beers are is the distinction between barrel-aged sour beers and kettle sour beers. And I figure there's no better two people to talk about these things besides you guys. So who wants to go first?
Do it, man. Okay. So at Jester King, what we like to pursue is mixed culture or mixed fermentation. So, if you go back in time, thousands of years in brewing, pretty much everything was fermented with a mixture of different types of yeasts and bacteria. Brewers really didn't know any different. I mean, if you look at like historical brewing textbooks, there was no reference to yeast or bacteria because they didn't know what it was. And so everything, again, was this mix. And then as, science progressed and brewers and understanding of yeast progressed, there was the ability to isolate, pure cultures of yeast to create flavors that are fairly predictable and consistent. And that's done really wonders for the overall quality and consistency of beer. What we do is not a pure culture fermentation with an isolated strain of brewer's yeast. It's a mix of different strains of brewer's yeast, but also just wild yeast and bacteria that we've cultured from the land and air around our brewery. And when you ferment with this mixed culture, it's a lot less predictable. You get a lot of just kind of natural variation from beer to beer. And you also get this natural acidity from bacteria breaking down organic compounds to create organic acids. And you get a sour beer or an acidity. And it's pretty slow developing. We'll put beer into a barrel and allow it to kind of really break down slowly over time. I've heard a chef refer to it as kind of like when rotten goes right. You're letting just this organic breakdown, which creates acids, which kind of have natural preservative qualities. And eventually, we as brewers will get together and decide what barrels we think are good. And that's all just sensory based. It's not like it meets a certain scientific criteria. It's just like, does it taste good? Does it smell good? And we'll empty those barrels, we'll create blends, and then re-ferment that beer in bottles and kegs and serve it.
Yeah, and I've had so many of your beers, and I'm a big fan of it. Nick actually works out there with you guys, and he's kind of like put me on to some of y'all's beers that I wasn't able to get. And I got to say, as far as mixed culture in Texas goes, I think you guys are really killing it, and that's why people are so excited. One of the main reasons that people are excited about Texas beer. So like you kind of put us on the map.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
That's
so like
very thank you.
that's awesome that we have a chance to talk with you today.
Awesome. Thank you.
I have a question about the barrels real quick.
Yeah.
Is there like a certain kind of barrel that you find works best for what you do?
For what we do, yes, and that's not to say that's right for anyone else, but for what we do prefer barrels that are kind of in that 400 to 600 liter range,
Okay.
also known as puncheon barrels.
Okay.
We've done a lot of like 225 liter like wine barrel fermentations, but I feel like even with like barrels that have had several fillings and should be kind of neutral, we still get quite a bit of oak character with the smaller barrels, and I like oak character a
Okay.
lot. Like, I mean, you know, give me like a buttery like Chardonnay like with a ton of oak character, and I think that's great. But I feel like with our beer, the oak character kind of masks a little bit of the characteristics from the fermentation. So we like barrels that are a little larger, a little less beer to oak surface area contact.
Okay.
And then I mean, the older our barrels get, the better.
better.
Yeah, just because there's kind of more of a neutral character where we're not getting as much oak, not as much tannin, more just whatever the yeast and bacteria create.
Okay, cool.
Do you have a preference on the type of oak? Is it?
You know, the French, it's mainly French oak, and but I mean we have some American oak and some Hungarian oak floating around the barrel room too. So I personally don't put a ton of stock into, you know, what type of oak it is.
Okay.
Nice.
Cool.
Yeah, to touch on maybe kind of going back to your question about the differences in, I think you said kettle sour and barrel aging sour is. I think it's important to point out that these things are methods, they're processes, and they're not beer definers by themselves. You know, for example, you can wort sour a beer and then further age it with mixed cultures and put it in barrels. So, you know, when it kind of comes down to when Jeff and I talk together about these things, we often just basically talk about the different methods that we use and kind of the reason we're using them and for particular beer flavors. And it's just kind of a toolbox that we have to make these different beers.
Have you ever done any of that? Like you take a kettle soured beer and then you pitch it with a mixed culture?
Yeah, actually, we do that a lot. Not only do we mix with or ferment with mixed cultures in stainless, we also have a series, our wild series that we call it, where we just take the sour wort and directly put it into barrels.
Nice.
That are at various stages of being clean or you know, having something previously in it, and basically go through the method of aging and souring and allowing it to develop flavors over time. And you know, what's interesting about that particular method is that when you have a controlled, clean acidification before going into the barrels, it's going to do something different than if it wasn't protected by that level of acidity. And you know, there's very different timelines and paths that the beer or the wort then goes through. And we're exploring that. We're exploring the idea of having these beers that are rather subtle, but have complexity of barrel aging and mixed cultures.
Is there anything that has made it to the market that you guys have produced in that vein? I can't think of anything that I've had. We had like some barrel aged beers, but the intention wasn't, you know, to further sour it, more to like add the flavor of the barrel. Has there anything that you've worked on made it out to market in that kind of vein?
Not so much. A lot of it's in the tap room. You'll definitely see it in the tap room, and then we'll have special releases. So here today, we have our more, I'll call it mass-produced, the one that actually makes it out in the market a lot more. Saison Poeta and Saison Poeta Harvest is a lightly soured wort that then goes into a mixed fermentation with a strain of Saison yeast and a strain of Brett. It goes through its fermentation and you know, it spends a couple months in the tanks, but then spends about 4 more months in red wine barrels, and then further doesn't so much acidify anymore. You know, that's kind of done. But starts developing oak flavor, the wine flavor, and a little more of kind of that wild whatever's going on in their flavor, and then that gets blended back with freshly pressed pomace, like the grape skins, and that's what this beer is. So, you know, you can see how this isn't just defined by saying this is a kettle sour beer. It is just uses that process among many others. And again, it's kind of like what tools are we using to try to get to this desired end product.
Nice. Yeah, that's really awesome, and I do love Saison Puede.
Cool.
So what do you guys have to say? Because I hear this a lot. You know, working in a retail establishment, we see so many different people who come in and they're looking for the new fad, the new trend. And I've heard so many people tell me that they think sour beers are just a fad. It's something that's going to be fleeting, and obviously I think that's untrue, considering the long history that beers in that flavor have been in the past. What do you have to say about that to the folks who would say that this is a fad and that this is all going to go away, just like the way of the IPL?
Has the IPL gone away? I haven't picked it up.
Well, when was the last one you had?
We'll say that. Nobody brews those anymore.
Yeah, right. Maybe that has gone away. I don't know. I mean, you know, if you look at just like sour beer, I mean, maybe it hasn't been referred to that historically, but I mean, it has been around for centuries, if not millennia. You know, we're very inspired by the tradition of Belgian lambic, and I mean, that's just centuries old, and I mean, I don't see that really fading away either. And so doing pre-acidification of wort. I mean, that's been done very long periods of time. You know, the German tradition. So I mean, I just don't see these things kind of slipping.
There's nothing new about
right.
any of this stuff.
Yeah.
It's only new to the mass market. You know, it's like people are coming in like, why does my beer taste like pickles? Because it's
I like
not.
that accent.
It's supposed to. That's why, you know.
Well, I think the interesting thing about this conversation is not so much whether it's a fad or not, but more of kind of how it develops into a mature beer scene, or you know, whether it's mature craft brewers, how they start with these ideas of maybe going back, reaching back and saying, this used to be done all the time, let me now try to do that. And then, you know, you get these really awesome traditional skilled breweries like Jester King. And then also, as part of that, people start saying, okay, well, now what else can we do with it? It's very American, I think, is very much like, okay, we brought it back, now let's make it our own, let's change it. And, you know, that's where I get really excited, is more about the innovation of what we can now do with this different set of tools, where we're reinvigorating old styles, but then developing some new methods, and then developing hybrid styles, or you know, even brand new styles like Cascadian Dark Ales, I guess, I don't know. But that's kind of where, you know, Blue Owl gets really excited, is the idea of, hey, can you marry acidity into a sour, or into a wee heavy? What would that be like? Is that good? Is that bad? Can you do it right? And then, you know, just kind of going from there.
Yeah, and I mean, I just add one more wrinkle to that, in that, you know, a lot of what we try to achieve is not necessarily like sourness for sourness sake. It's more just like creating a level of acidity in beer to ultimately create beer that's drinkable. Because I tell our crew at Jester King, like, no matter what it is, I mean, barley wine or Helles, like, it should be a drinkable beer, meaning like you have one, you're like, oh, I can drink another glass of that. And I see acidity is just a gateway. I mean, certainly in the wine world, acid is a huge, and the cooking world as well, acid's a huge component of the palate and being able to enjoy food and drink. So to say that, you know, there's going to be an acid component to beer, I don't think is anything new or anything that is going to go away anytime soon.
Yeah.
Well, that's good
I think
to know.
also like that ignorance of people not knowing what a sour is just goes back to education, right? And educating the public. And do you guys have like education pieces built into the brewery where
you absolutely have to, and not only do you have to educate, you have to re-educate sometimes, and
right.
You know, it can. There's cases where it's been so bad where people kind of, you know, take shortcuts or cheapen things, or
right.
just do things kind of sketchy, and then it might tarnish the name. But again, we're going back to how the industry or how this particular facet of craft is maturing. And that's always a part of the initial bit, is everyone just kind of scrambling to figure out, what is this? What are we doing? How do we sell it?
Right.
And I feel like we're getting past that. And I think that's, if we were to go back on every time that Jeff and I spoke, I think there would be an evolution in our conversations on trying to figure out what we're doing and what is the difference, and is there a difference, and then move on to the fact that who cares if there's a difference, or like you're comparing apples and oranges. So I forgot what the question was, but there's my rant.
Well, that's all right,
That's
though.
good.
I'd say big props to you, Jeff. Your blog on your website, you do a good job of educating that way. And
Oh,
Jeff,
thank
you're always doing interviews. As long as I can remember, Jester King's coming up on 8 years, 7 years?
7 years.
7 years. So as long as, for the last 7 years, every time you turn around, you're somewhere doing an interview or an article or something like that. So great job on all of that. My question is, how many first-time beer drinkers are y'all starting to get y'all's way? Like, the old story is 7 years ago, 10 years ago, I got into craft beer because I drank all the stuff we all had.
Yeah.
And then I finally found it and was awakened, right? Like, got out of the matrix. Now people they're already, all of this is there. Like, a new kid is.
You guys were 2010 that you opened, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so how was 2010 versus 2017?
I mean, the market, I think, is a lot more mature, for sure. People generally know a lot more about beer walking in the door than ever before.
Yeah.
I don't know, we've always appealed to somewhat of kind of like a geeky subset of beer, where I felt like even back in 2010, the customers walking in the door were fairly knowledgeable.
Yeah.
That being said, I mean, we're on the kind of the doorstep, or kind of the area where Austin ends and the hill country begins, where, we get a lot of people who, it is their first experience with any type of beer with acidity. I mean, just being in our tap room yesterday, someone walked in and said, like, I've never had a beer that's sour before, like, just educate me about that.
Yeah.
So I still think that there's a lot of people still being introduced to not just craft beer, but certainly sour beer as well.
Right.
Yeah.
That's definitely something that I can attest to. We see so many people at Craft Pride who have, one, never been to Texas, never had a Texas beer, and never had a sour beer. We love sour beers at Craft Pride, and so we always have a large selection for folks to try. Obviously, we carry Jester King in bottles, and we carry Blue Owl on draft all the time. So some of y'all's beers do make it into the hands of folks who have never had anything in that vein before, and it's kind of polarizing with folks who have little experience in the beer industry, because some people will try it and be like, that's amazing, it tastes like a fresh brewed lemonade with rosemary, and I'm like, yeah, that's what you should get. And some people are like, this is, something's wrong with this, can I get a refund? And it's like, no, like, that's kind of what we are, and we never sell anyone a beer like that, especially if they tell us that they don't have any experience, without giving them some education first.
Yeah.
To kind of like tell you, okay, well, this is what you can expect. It's intentionally to be like this, and this is why it tastes this way. Especially when it comes to beers that have the terroir, because there's things that you can pick out that don't taste like anything that typical beers do, like
Yeah, that can
typical beers that no one can see in my air quotes, but
Yeah. Yeah, I think as far as our educational aspect goes, we like basically reminding people that acidity is in just about everything in their daily life. Beverages, Coca-Cola has more acidity than we've had in any of our beers, and people just aren't necessarily used to having acidity in these, whatever beer style that they're used to. But that's what we find most fascinating, is that there's a whole set of taste buds that are not being used, or not being used very much when you're drinking beers. And our whole goal is to kind of experiment and feel that out. And I think even the word sour can oftentimes be misleading, and I'm
Definitely.
sure it helps us kind of get a general point across. But then again, as we mature as brewers, as consumers mature, they start, looking at degrees of sourness. Okay, is this balanced? What's balancing it? How is it interacting with the other flavors, with the bitterness or the sweetness? So all those things, I think, happen after you kind of get over the fact that sour is just acidity. There's a little bit of acidity in there, like lemonade. You know, I say that a lot. It's easy to understand lemonade, I think.
Yeah, I think so, because lemons are naturally sour,
Yeah,
and you don't do anything to it. It's just like, oh, it's sour and it's delicious.
Yeah,
I
balance
love-
it out with some sweetness.
I love meeting people who have never had a sour beer, and they come up and they're like, "Well, I don't really like beer," and it reminds me of something Jeff Stuffing said a long time ago. I'm gonna probably butcher this, but saying that you don't like beer is like saying you don't like food.
Yeah.
There's something there for you, and when we get somebody new who hasn't had sour beer, and I tell them, okay, well, the first sip is acclimation, and so have that, then your palate will be woken by that, and have another sip, and then this is where the quenching and flavor, and you get all that from the nose first, and it's fun to see people go from I don't like beer to oh my god, this is beer, and it's amazing to watch their eyes light up, and they look at the menu, they're like, well, what's next? Like, well, we got some stuff. So
We got some stuff.
I mean,
Just
literally,
everything.
there's probably literally hundreds of different things to drink at Jester
Yeah.
King, from wine, cider. So we've had mead, we've had sake, we've had. We have not just Jester King's beer, but beers from all over, and it's a real it's fun to watch people go from I don't like beer to I like sour beer.
Yeah.
Like in just a sip or two. It's so.
Yeah,
It's
again, it's
amazing.
like unlocking all these taste buds on their tongue that previously were unused
Yeah.
whenever
exactly.
drinking a beer.
Yeah. So what would you say, because obviously you guys have very different approaches to making beer and different business models, whereas Jeff, or Young, I guess we'll just call you Y and S,
J-Yo.
you're kind of like modeled after like the more urban brewery. You're in town, you get a lot of foot traffic, whereas you guys out at Jester King are a destination. Like, people have to go out of their way to find your beers. How do you think that that's affected like your growth and your popularity of your beers?
Yours is more interesting. You go.
So what really helped us was being able to sell at our tasting room. When we opened in 2010, it was illegal to sell beer in our tasting room. People would come out and we'd give them free samples. We did the whole kind of, thing where we'd sell the glass and the beer was free, and that has continued on, even to this day, I think, in certain parts of the state. And what all changed was in 2013 when there were some bills that went through the Texas legislature, some good, some bad, but I mean, one of the things that certainly helped out small breweries making under 10,000 barrels a year like us was that we could now sell on site in our tap room, both to take bottles away from the brewery to go and to drink by the glass at the brewery. And all of a sudden, like, this business model of making like 2,000 barrels a year, which isn't that much, became very viable. I mean, we were more or less a break-even business until the law changed, and all of a sudden, like overnight, our margins essentially doubled because people could come to us and legally buy the beer instead of having to have it go through the distribution tier. And then there's also kind of the I'd never in a million years envisioned like this would be like a reality of how we do business, but like people, and who knows, this may not last, but I mean, at this moment in time, at least, people distribute the beer for us. What I mean by that is like people will come to the brewery and they'll have their trades set up,
Yeah.
and they'll send beer to all their friends all over the country or even internationally. And, it's just, we get to sell at retail price and the beer gets distributed for us. I mean, it's just like, I can't imagine that, again, we didn't plan for that, but I mean, it's been.
How does that make you feel? Because I know that like anytime you guys have a release, if you're on any of the beer forums, people are like freaking out the day before. Like, what are you going? What time are you going to be there? Are you
Yeah.
guys going to line up? How does like as an owner, is that like, are you flattered by that? Is it overwhelming? Like, how do you guys feel about that?
I guess, I mean, I kind of have two minds about that. Like, on the one hand, it's kind of like, well, is anyone drinking our beer? Because the conversation's never about like what it
Right,
tastes
it's always
like
about
or-
trading it or like, yeah, whether or not they're going to get it.
I mean, but on the other hand, like, it is very flattering to think that like, yeah, people like geek out and travel from far and wide, and like people in other parts of the world like want access to our beer. That's
Right.
incredibly flattering because like, I never worked professionally in any other brewery. Most of our staff have never worked professionally anywhere else. So like for this collection of just kind of like ragtag homebrewers to have like this following beyond our immediate surroundings
Right.
is hugely flattering, and we don't take it for granted.
Yeah, awesome.
Nice.
Yeah, I think to piggyback on that, but still talk about your brewery more than mine. You know, I love the idea of the experiential kind of aspect of beer. I like drinking beer. I like getting a little toasty sometimes, but oftentimes it's about the experience of whether it's the people or the place. And Jester King is the heart of. I'm speaking out of place because I'm speaking for Jeff right now, but. You know, I've always felt like that is really the heart of Jester King and why people have such a strong affinity to it, because it's so like well done and executed. And it's to go back to Blue Owl. It's, you know, yeah, we are on the corner of a busy street, and you know that's our home right now. And it bothers us a little bit that, you know, we don't have the just that same element of environment. But what we do to try to compensate is we pull on one of the core aspects of Blue Owl, which is creating. We love creating things, beer, of course, but you know, we love creating shit like that gas pump that's serving beer. Just these things that give you an outlet to do something kind of fun and different and create something. So oftentimes in our tap room, we have events, or you can come in and you know, you can grab a coloring book or a Etch-a-Sketch or make a terrarium, and all of these things all have the common theme of creating. And you know, I think for Austin that really appeals, because most Austinites, I feel like the average Austinite is somebody who kind of gives a damn and, you know, isn't just there to drink. You know, they're there to socialize. They like making things. They like thinking about things and talking about things. So if you're just a brewery that just has beer being offered, that's one thing. But if you're an experience, you're an environment, you have something that appeals to more than just drinking the beer, then you're a better brewery.
Touching on your experimenting, how y'all go into a little bit of detail on your barrel aging experimentations. Just what are y'all's practices? I know some, but for people listening, y'all care to touch on experimentation with barrels?
Do you guys ever experiment with barrels, Jeff?
I don't think so.
I guess I'll start because we're not even 2 yet, so you know, our lambic isn't coming out for another couple years. But you know, so what we're doing is you know, go back to the core of what Blue Owl is, and it's generally recognizable beer styles that integrate acidity as one of the components, and we can go in, you know, any avenue that any other brewery goes in. We can barrel age for the sake of like getting bourbon whiskey character, and how does that play? We have our sour wee heavy is going into Balcones brimstone barrels, and some fresh orange zest, and it's almost like a old fashioned. We're calling it owl fashioned, and you know, it's just it's a really cool. Again, it's like now we have acidity combined with these typically like big sweet barrel aged beers. That acidity changes the characteristic a lot. And then the other, you know, aspect is more what we're talking about here, where you're letting wildness happen, uncontrolledness, and you know, that's something that is Blue Owl. We like to have a lot of control. We're kind of sick. We like to have as much control as we can, but fundamentally, even our souring is a wild process. We're using naturally occurring bacteria, wild yeast, mold, spores, all that kind of stuff is on the grain, and you know, part of our process is trying to figure out how the hell to make that go right, and even then, after that, control it and dial it in for the different beers, different flavors from different kinds of bacteria. So then that just carries through into the barrels too.
I wanted to bounce back just like 1 second to kind of the whole business model conversation, if you will. I think what is really cool that Blue Owl creates is a like urban neighborhood destination, and I think this is becoming. I mean, if you look at the cover of the Brewers Association magazine, the new brewer, it's Austin Beer Works tap room, and is talking about like the rise of tap rooms and how more and more breweries are becoming these like neighborhood destination spots, like these hubs. And from what I've read, like that's kind of how it was like back in the 19th century, like in towns and villages and cities, like every block had its like baker and butcher and brewer. And so I think we're getting back to that. And I think for the east side, Blue Owl provides that to like, Cesar Chavez. I mean, it's like this place you can go and has a really cool decor, cool vibe, and hang out in an urban setting and be like a source of like neighborhood cohesion and neighborhood development.
Thanks, Jeff.
Y'all think the era of new brewery with the goal of going nationwide, do you think that's done? You think we're...
I think that door's closing, to be honest.
Yeah, it's definitely changed. It
Yeah.
definitely is not what it used to be.
I mean, there's just so much
for a good reason.
to love and experience of the culture right around you.
Right.
We talk about wild cultures, but I spent the night last night in San Antonio, not with Catherine, but
Not with me. Just
but,
heads up.
But when you come from Houston, there's a different energy in San Antonio. You come to Austin, it has its own energy. Houston is so, with all the different parts of Houston. It's, Dallas. Yeah, we won't talk about that, but Dallas is fine. But I love, the local feel to, what you guys are doing, what a lot of the brewers are doing now. It's almost, I don't know. There's just so much to love right around you.
There's a charm. There's a charm, right, in being
And again, I think
so
that
hyper local.
I'm sorry. I think that is still part of the core of what makes a successful brewery is can you relate to people in a level more fundamental than just beer, but your atmosphere, do they identify with you? And we just brought up Austin Beer Works, who is identified, I feel like, as Austin Beer. They took a good name, and then a lot of people that live in Austin can look at them and say, like, I get that, I understand that, and I think that's been a big part of their kind of genius plan to take over Austin is to just be that like that Austener kind of vibe.
Yeah, they're synonymous with
They are.
with it because it's ubiquitous. There's not one bar in town you can go and not find at least one Austin Beer Works handle, which I love because they make excellent beers, and so it makes me so proud to see a homegrown business that has dominated the market even against larger players who are specifically trying to shut out guys that are doing stuff just like that.
Yeah, and they're they do it so respectfully. Like these guys, they almost piss me off at how good they are at just everything that they do. You just love them so much that it's like, why can't I be cool like you? And I would go as far to say that Jester King and Blue Owl aren't going to be that. We are a little more like.
Experimental, I don't know.
We're
a little. We're not
a little niche-y.
A little more niche, yeah. I think niche is right. We aspire to make what I call, or not what I. Well, I didn't come up with the term, but like what I call our beer is farmhouse ale. Beers that are kind of rustically inspired, oftentimes from that like Western European tradition of saison and bière de garde. Also, I mentioned the lambic tradition, and just trying to make beers that. Highly influenced by fermentation. I love hops and I love malts and I love adjunct ingredients, but ultimately, like, it's very like yeast and bacteria-driven beers. So yeah, it's a total niche. And we make 2,000 barrels a year. That's like half the size of like a big restaurant brewery would make. It's just super small.
Yeah, going back to like the idea of the neighborhood pub also being a brewery, I feel like one of the cities that's really embraced this is Denver. I don't know if either of you have been there, but every bar in Denver is also a brewery. It's like a little like 1.5 barrel system behind the bar, basically.
Even the gas stations are little brew pubs now.
Right. And it's so magical because the whole town just smells like barley. It just smells like barley as you walk down streets because people are brewing beer while you're in there.
And pot.
Yeah, well, barley and pot. That's
that.
true.
I thought it smelled like pot.
There's a lot of hops here.
Hey, those are very closely related, so I understand.
That's right.
But yeah, so I really hope that we can move towards something like that where more and more people gravitate towards that model and are successful in it so that we can eliminate these larger players by focusing on tap rooms.
Do you think that there will be an elimination of the larger players? Do you guys see that?
I doubt it.
What is it, a coagulation? What is it? They're all like coming together.
Yeah. It's like becoming one. I use the
That's what's
Transformers,
happening.
but I always use the wrong Transformer. but it's like just a huge like robot that's all.
Well,
I don't know, that's
Voltron.
Voltron, that's it.
Voltron.
That's my guy right there.
Craft
Yeah.
beer is like Voltron.
Yeah.
Well, they keep changing their strategy, like Big Beer at least, to like consolidate power base in by buying smaller breweries, and that's why I love you guys for not doing that, not being willing to compromise your principles, which is excellent because that's the only way that we're ever going to survive as a community is if we all stand together and say, no, I don't want your $10 million.
Well, then
I'll
let me
keep
ask
my
you
integrity.
A question.
Yeah.
No, I
Ask you
don't
a
want
question?
your $10
Yeah.
million.
Why do you think it's actually important that we all don't become part of that conglomeration?
Because we want diversity, just like with yeast, you want a diverse species of everything, and so
But
we
they have
need
everything from Wicked Weed now to 10 Barrel Brewery.
I mean,
kind of playing devil's
I mean,
advocate.
Yeah, no.
I mean, it's always tough for me to speak about Wicked Weed because I'm a little conflicted because my close personal friend is still one of the owners there, but despite that, I mean, I think just like you saw with Goose Island with their barrel program, you're going to see fewer and fewer options marketed to a broader and broader pool of people.
Right.
So I think Wicked Weed used to. I'm speaking a little out of turn because I'm not sure exactly how things are going to play out. They haven't been owned by AB for that long at this point, but I mean they would pump out so many interesting creations, and they might still do that in their tap room. But I feel like their SKUs are going to get narrower and narrower and narrower because it's going to be not creativity driven, it's going to be brand and finance
Profit.
driven.
Yep.
Yeah, where like what's selling the best? How can we maximize this investment? I mean, that's going to be the mentality behind it instead of like let's just fuck around and have a lot of
If
fun.
nothing else, we're inefficient.
Yeah. Which like I understand like that a business is meant to be profitable, and no one wants a brewer to operate at a loss. But there has to be people who are willing to say, I'm not here for a payout. I'm here because I'm doing what I love, and I don't have to work in a cubicle. I can do something that I love and that I'm passionate about, and people are going to pay me to do it, and pay me well. And so, yeah, thank you guys for being respectable.
Yeah. Well, nobody's offered me a check yet, so don't.
Same here, right? No,
I
it's funny.
think there's always two parts of a business, right? Because like you said, yes, you want to have integrity in your business, but it's a business. And you don't know what's going to happen or what's going to come. And I think it's hard to judge people based on, from an outsider. Because, yes, we love craft beer, but we don't run their business.
Yeah.
I don't know what their situations are. And
Our friend Scott Metzger, I mean, just to kind of like quote unquote keep it real, like our friend Scott Metzger from
Shout
Freetail
out.
said, like, every brewer would sell out, but for the fact that their valuations will never support it.
yeah, and Scott says another great thing too is that he doesn't really, he's not opposed to people selling out. He's opposed to people not being honest about what's going to happen.
Every time I hear this is better for access to ingredients,
Right,
and
or better
opening new
desk
markets,
distribution,
it's just-
or
it's just such-
our beer's not going to
really
change.
is.
Your beer has to change
Yeah.
because it's not your beer anymore, and they're going to go for the bottom line and not for the craft. But what are you going to do?
That kind of gets back to maybe how I feel about the whole thing is I've always thought there really needs to be a balance. Like, I can't imagine a world where 100% of the beer is craft local beer.
Right.
It doesn't make sense to me. It makes more sense where the few that actually give a shit, that are willing to take chances, that are not in it for the money, they are the people that come to the Texas Craft Brewers Festival or make beer for the Texas Craft Brewers Festival. But I feel like you almost still have to have the man. You have to have the bigger players so that you can be different than them.
That's a good way to look at it. That there has to be a yin and a yang to everything. Where if there wasn't 10 Barrel selling out, no one would know the difference between a brewery that is owned by AB and a brewery that's not.
Yeah, so the onus is kind of on us to, make sure that people understand, and it does actually matter, which, I constantly ask myself, does it matter? And I think for each brewery and each person, they have a different answer for why it does. For me, right now, I love the fact that I have complete freedom to just do whatever the fuck I want. And we had a crazy idea of you had a crazy idea of putting a little brewery on the outside of Austin and Hill Country on a little farm, and it turned into a huge national thing. And we had the idea to just do sour mash everything and start making these different styles. And if you're constantly constrained by people telling you, well, that's not a profitable avenue, I don't think the core demographic is going to go for that, then those things won't happen, and people like me will be really bored.
Yeah, I mean, there has to be like the quote unquote like lunatic fringe out there, just like out in like left field, like cutting their ear off. I mean, that's important to really any industry.
I never thought about that, but Jester King is the Van Gogh of craft beer.
We're all gonna get an ear tomorrow in the mail.
Cut out their ear one year.
That'd be a great costume.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much for coming out and talking with me a little bit and educating some folks. Thank you guys from Interbrews and She's Crafty for coming and sitting in with us.
Yeah,
I really
anytime.
appreciate you guys. And Nick, thanks for making it out here, man.
Hey, thanks, dude. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for the audience.
Oh, are you gonna wait? I thought we were gonna drop some rap
guys are
battle.
awesome.
No. Jeff was gonna do some rapping, I think, right? You want us to lay a beat down for you?
Nah, do it.
All right, maybe later.